So I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of flack for this one. But I told you guys I would speak my mind, and this is something I'm very passionate about. So let's get into it. Before you click off the video though, hear me out, and I'll explain my thought process on this. I'm not necessarily going to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but I think I've got an insight on this a little bit different than at least the mainstream culture goes on this subject. So when I was a teenager and in my early 20s, Dave Ramsey was a big staple in my thought process in my life of my financial life. So I always thought that having financial freedom was what Dave Ramsey portrayed. So financial freedom to me was being out of debt, being in a position to where you were living within your means, like he says. And in order to get there, you just have to hunker down. You have to live on rice and beans, and you need to do whatever it takes, selling, property, getting out of debt to get to that destination, essentially. So that's what I did. These pipes are so hard to keep lit. I'm not much of a pipe smoker. I really enjoy pipes, but I sure have a hard time packing them sometimes. But anyway, when I was a teenager and in my early mid-20s, even throughout my 20s, honestly, I bought into that thought process that to be free, you need to be out of debt. Well, I had a mortgage. I thought that was something that was bad, but something that I had to do because I didn't want to pay rent. So I had a mortgage. We really pushed really hard, my wife and I, to try to pay down that mortgage, to try to put all the money into the mortgage, any excess that I had. And through my entire 20s, I struggled. I struggled to be able to make ends meet, and I struggled to be able to achieve what I thought was some financial freedom, like the chokehold that a lot of people feel in their life. It's just, it's so hard to describe that if you haven't been there, but I know a lot of you guys have been there. So that was kind of my 20s. I pushed really hard to get out of debt. I worked really hard on my job, and it didn't seem like it was progressing. It didn't seem like I was getting anywhere, and it didn't seem like we were moving forward anyway, because that whole rice and beans thing, we lived it. I'm a living testament to how many rice and beans and macaroni and ramen we ate in our 20s to be able to get on the other side. And it just didn't seem like it was working. But when it didn't seem like it was working, I thought it was my fault for not hunkering down enough. So that's what I did. The more I hunkered down, it seemed like the harder it got. And you might say, well, how does that make sense? You're hunkering down and you're saving, and so why are you not getting ahead? Well, there's some things that people don't quite understand, and the reason why they don't understand it is because of it's a lack of education, just to be honest. Dave Ramsey preaches debt is bad, cash is king, right? If you've listened to anything of Dave Ramsey, that is the main focal point, okay? So that was my thought process. Anything that was debt related, you were a slave to the debtor. The Bible says that you are a slave to the debtor, which I wholeheartedly still believe. Don't go against that. But if you're a slave to the indebtor, that means cash is king. That means if you have cash and you don't have debt, you are financially free and you're just living high on life. Well, I've lived that side of it, and I can be the first to say, no, that's not actually the case. There's a couple different reasons. Well, there's more than a couple different reasons, but the main reason why cash is not king is because of inflation. So let me explain something to you guys. It's a very simple concept, but this is something that I didn't really understand. I heard a lot, but I didn't really understand until I got to about 30 to 31 years old. It took me that long. Is if you have $100 in the bank account, okay? You pinched your pennies, you saved $100. Next year, is that, and you don't spend it, next year, is that $100 in that bank account $100? Think about it. You might say yes. You might say, yeah, absolutely, it's $100. Not only is it $100, but the bank is going to pay me 0.0002% interest. So it's over $100. So on paper, correct. You're right. When you go purchase something that is of value this year as opposed to next year, is that $100, can it purchase the same thing this year as opposed to next year? We've all gone through this whole pandemic together. We've all seen what inflation does. So we are in a period called hyperinflation. Hyperinflation, you'll see swings of 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100, 200% inflation rate. Now, if you take all those numbers and you average them out, I've heard numbers of 12%, I've heard numbers of 15%, I've heard numbers of 8%. Quite frankly, I think a lot of that's hogwash, because you and I both know when you go to the grocery store, I'm not seeing increases of 12%. I'm seeing increase of 50 to 100% or more on my entire grocery bill, not just, and that's averaging out. That's not just on milk. Eggs, for instance. Okay. So, that being said, if you have $100 in the bank account and you have $100, the same $100 in next year, what you were able to purchase with $100 this year is not going to be the same next year. Now, that's in a hyperinflationary period. So what if you say, okay, Noah, that's fine, I understand that, but let's just say in a normal period, okay? Well, if you were to average out the normal inflation over the last 20, 30 years, it comes out to over 3%. So, interesting. So that means next year, if you just do an average, next year my $100 is only going to be worth $97. Interesting. Okay, so if I keep that $100 in the bank account for 2 years, what's that called? Compound interest. You're negatively compounding interest on yourself. The longer you keep that savings in the bank account, the lower it will go. It's a crazy concept. I know it's backwards than a lot of people think, but it's the true concept. Unfortunately, this is the society we live in. We live in hyperinflation. We live in normal inflation, and it doesn't work to save your money. Okay, so we got that out of the way. So if you say, okay, we're not going to save our money, then what are we going to do with our money? If you collect the money in and we're not putting it away, well, then what are we going to do with it? We're going to pay off debt, right? Okay, let's play that out. Let's pay the debt off. So my first house was $65,000. It's crazy to think about that. We bought our first house I believe it was about 15 years ago now. $65,000. That house today is worth close to $200,000 now, 15 years later. That in itself will tell you what inflation will do. So $65,000. I had a payment, I believe it was $375.25 or something like that per month. Now, what did I do with that money? I put it to the mortgage, $375, and then anything I had extra, where did I put it? To the mortgage. Of course. Like, that's what Dave Ramsey would want. You got to pay off your debt. You got to pay it off as fast as you can. Okay, sure. So let's sit down here and let's do the math. $375 per month on a $65,000 mortgage. What was our interest rate? Interest rate at that time was 4.25%. It was an average interest rate back then, 15 years ago. Wasn't terrible, wasn't crazy. So any extra money we had, I was dumping 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, 800 to that mortgage. So we're paying things off. We're paying things off. We're paying things off. And what's our lifestyle look like? It's rice and beans, macaroni and cheese, ramen. It was just constant, like, living from paycheck to paycheck. Why? Because we got to put an emergency fund in the bank account. We got to do all the Dave Ramsey steps. We got to put the rest of it towards the mortgage because we got to get out of this debt. You know what our life looked like back then? It was stressful. Stressful. Okay. So you can say, well, yeah, sure, it's stressful getting in a better place financially. It's stressful getting to the point to where you're able to do well. So did we do well in that? We made somewhere in the nature of $30,000 a year. So we were able to put away, month to month, what? $100, $200, $300, $400, $500 towards the mortgage. Wasn't much. But we're still putting money away. That was the thought process. We're still putting money away. It's a good thing. It's a good thing. 5 years into that, 4.5 years into that, didn't get anywhere. What that allowed us to do was, instead of owing $65,000 on the mortgage, we owed 5 years in, we owed about 60. Cool. Think about that. You're living paycheck to paycheck. You're pinching your pennies for what? So that you can get to a point 30 years from now, or the idea is to pay it off sooner, right? So let's just say 15 years from now, that you're able to not have that $375 a month over your head. Now, hold that thought. Keep listening. You'll see where I'm headed with this. I had the same thought process going into the next mortgage when we purchased the next place. Same thought process. Went into that one. We jumped from $375 a month to $1,400 a month. But the whole plan was still the same. It was to get out of debt. It was to lower the mortgage down. At that point, we went from a neighborhood to a farm. That's why such a large increase. Everything came just crashing down through that process. It's a long story. You'll hear some of the story on some of these videos I'm writing or filming, and I'll tell you some of the backstory with some other videos. But everything came crashing down, okay? And I started listening to some different voices, some different financial voices. That was in my entire 20s, going through that Dave Ramsey period. Teens also, all the way through 20s. Got to 30 years old and said, this is not working. So why? So I started listening to somebody else. I talked about it before. His name is Jim Rohn. And some of the things he said just clicked. They made sense. But what I noticed was, like, he's not talking about debt. The more I listened to him, I never heard him say anything about debt. To this day, there is one clip that I know of, and I'm sure you can probably find more. Jim Rohn has since passed away. He was a financial mentor, self-help type of guy. He trained Tony Robbins. But there was one thing in all the stuff that I've studied on Jim Rohn that I found that he says on debt. There's a small clip, and he says, do this, 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 this. And if you have debt, get out of that debt real quick first. If you got bad debt, now let's focus on this. And it was like, that's all? That's all you're going to talk about it? That's all Dave Ramsey talks about. That, like, his whole slogans is debt is dumb, cash is king. Like, wait a minute. Why aren't you focused on the debt? Well, what was Jim Rohn focused on then? What's the difference between someone like Jim Rohn and someone like Dave Ramsey? Start listening to Jim Rohn. I challenge anybody out there. Phenomenal guy. He focuses on the mindset, and he focuses on income. Income. Not debt. Income. Now, will you hear Dave Ramsey talk about income? Sure. Which one does he focus on, though? Debt. So you could say, well, that's fine. You know, he touches on both subjects, though. Here's the main problem. You boil everything down. And we'll talk about this on some later videos. We'll get into this subject. But this is it in a snapshot for you. And this is what changed the way I thought was what you focus on is where you will end up. So if you focus on the debt, if that is all you're focused on, what are you focused on? You're focused on fear. You're focused on, like, how do I pay off a $65,000 mortgage, making $30,000 a year, and 2 kids? Well, that's kind of hard. That's not easy. Okay, so what would be the better approach? Well, let's not worry about the debt right now. Maybe we'll come back to that. But let's focus on the income. Hey, let's take our $30,000 and let's make that $60,000. And maybe once we hit $60,000, maybe that $65,000 debt won't really feel like a big deal at all. Maybe the $375 a month really won't hurt us in any way. Right? Right. That is it in a boiled down nutshell. When I finally understood that, things changed for me. Now, how do you get from a $30,000 a year income to a $60,000 a year income. You got to change the way you think. You got to say, this is what I'm used to doing, and I'm tired of that, and I'm ready to basically throw on a whole new rule set of myself to something else. Everything that you are used to currently, is a storyline that you've built around yourself. And for myself, I had a storyline built around myself that debt was bad. I needed to put all my income into either paying off debt, so just paying the bank, so making them more money, giving them more money, or putting the money into a savings account. So what did we talk about earlier in this video? Well, you put it in the savings account, it's depleting, and if you give it to the bank, you're saving up for something that's 15 years from now, 20, 30 years from now, which is great. There's nothing wrong with putting money away for a rainy day, but you're not fixing the problem that's in front of you. The main problem is not the debt. The main problem is the income. Think about this. If a millionaire, someone who makes $1 million a year, has $65,000 in debt and $375 a month in a mortgage payment, does that feel significant? No, not at all. It doesn't. It feels as if it was chump change. It's small. It's pennies. I could pay that off in a second if I wanted to. But if you have low income and you have a high debt, then that's where you start choking. But the problem that Dave Ramsey doesn't talk about is, in order to live in a place like you and I live, America or a lot of other countries, like $65,000 as a mortgage is a cheap mortgage. Yes, there's other ways of doing it, and I am wholeheartedly believe that you should explore those options. RVs, living in, renting out people's basements, tiny homes. There's all sorts of different scenarios, and I'm an advocate for all that. But as a whole, something that on that lines, $65,000 is not an expensive mortgage. You're not really living above your means. You are living fairly normal, but the problem is you don't make very much money. Well, how do you get out of that $30,000 then? How do you get up to the next level? You got to change the way you think. You got to get out of the thought process. And for me, at that time, it was everything I did for a living, I had to work with my hands. I thought that that's how I made a living. And so everything that I would look to, I'd get on job forums, Indeed and ZipRecruiter and all these different ones, and I would funnel out my skill set. There wasn't anything that made more than $30K at the time. So what's that mean? You got to get out of your skill set into a different skill set. I had to go from working with my hands of saying, okay, I'm looking for print shop jobs, I'm looking for mechanic jobs, I'm looking for all these different things that I can do, warehouse jobs, and I got to get into a thought process of, maybe I don't have very good skill sets. Maybe my value to the marketplace, like what Jim Rohn says all the time, is not of any value. That's a hard thing to admit, because you're paid for your value. It's supply and demand. If someone says that this lighter is worth $1, it's only worth $1 until what? Somebody else comes along and they say, well, I'll pay $1 for that. Now you have two people arguing over this lighter for $1, then what's happened? One of them says, fine, I'll pay more than $1. I'll pay $2. Now you have supply and demand. 2 people are demanding this lighter, and the value is going up. 3, 4, 5 people creates the value of this lighter going up and up and up. So the skill set that I had, if I only have a few people demanding that skill set, then that skill set is not going to be paid very much. So get into a career that the demand is high. Get into a skill set that people are willing to pay you more than minimum, more than the minimum wage. Like, I am all for going and working at McDonald's. It's great. But don't make it the end game. Make it the starting point. Make it something that you need to jump into. Sit there and fry French fries. No problem with that. But then look at something else I can do, because that the value of frying French fries at McDonald's or any other fast food restaurant. Trust me, I'm not dogging anybody who works at a fast food restaurant. I have myself. But the value where you're at is only basically minimum wage. Because lots and lots and lots and lots of people out there can fry French fries. So you have huge supply and very little demand because, I mean, how many restaurants need French fry fryers? I can't even say it. Sure, there's a number of restaurants out there, but there's a way bigger number of people who can do it. So this is something that Jim Rohn says. Very important. Work on yourself harder than you do on your job. Let that sink in. Work on yourself harder than you do on your job. That was something that I struggled with when I first heard that, and I think a lot of other people do, and I think you might too also. Why do you struggle with that? Well, the reason why I struggled with it was because I want to be the hardest worker I can be. I've always been that way. I wanted to work really hard on my job. And so when I think about working on myself harder, how do I work harder on myself harder than I do at my job, because I'm trying to be the hardest worker? The reason and the point to what he's saying in that is that if you are the best French fry fryer there is out there, maybe Wendy's might call you and say, "Man, you sure can fry some French fries. I want to hire you over here." So instead of making $10 an hour at McDonald's, maybe you're going to be making $10.50 at Wendy's. But there's only a certain point to where people are willing to pay for French fry fryers, right? There's a cap out. I don't know what that cap out is. Maybe it's $12, $13, $14, $15 an hour. But you sure ain't going to be making $60,000 a year, $30, $40, $50 an hour as a French fry fryer. So what's that mean then? That means when I go home, I need to be studying for something different than the French fry fryer. I need to be taking my skill set and saying, yep, I'm a really good French fry fryer, but I think I'm going to learn a new skill set. Now, stay tuned to this channel, and I will try to explain what I've learned of what skill set you need to jump into. And I'll give you a snapshot of that. It's not, I'm a good French fry fryer at $10 an hour, and now I need to be a burger griller. That's not it. Because if you're going from $10 from a French fry fryer to $11 as a burger fryer or griller. The whole concept is kind of funny to me. But if you go from this to that, then what are you doing? You're making a buck. You don't value yourself. Learn to value yourself more. Learn to say, I think I'm willing to charge a lot more than $10 an hour for my time that I'm never going to get back. So go from a French fry fryer to something completely different. Something that's like maybe owning a business. Maybe being a sales rep. Maybe putting yourself into a position, a loan officer. Maybe putting yourself into a position that the level of increase that you are learning and the pay that you're going to get for that increase is so much higher. Give yourself a chance to have some dreams. You can't dream going from $10 to $11 very well. You can really dream going from 10 to 30, 40, 50, 100, 200, $500 an hour. You can really dream. And when you dream, you tend to work harder on it. There's nothing wrong with making a lot of money as long as the money that you're making is being put to good use. So, to wrap all this up, I would say there's nothing wrong with Dave Ramsey and the aspect of saying live within your means. You know, the average 2 household income in the United States making $80,000 to $100,000 a year and having $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 in debt. I get it. That the math doesn't work out on that. And if they need to sell their house, sell their cars, get rid of their credit cards and snip them up, then that's fine. Like, if you're not making the money that you borrowed, if you're not making more money on the money that you borrowed, it's called good debt and bad debt. If you want to listen to something that's really good on education on that, Robert Kiyosaki's book, Good Debt, Bad Debt, or no, excuse me, it's not Good Debt, Bad Debt, it's Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and he talks about good debt, bad debt in there. That's a good way to educate yourself on that. So there is good, there is bad, but if you're not making more money than the money you borrowed, then sure, it's a liability. But the main thing to focus on is the income. I sold a place on the whole Dave Ramsey mindset. I sold that place when I had a gentleman who had way more financial study or wisdom or proven track record than Dave Ramsey has. He told me not to do it. And I sold that place because I was listening to Dave Ramsey and I thought, what do I do in this scenario? What would Dave Ramsey have me do? I was listening to Dave Ramsey every day. Sold that place. From the initial sale, because we had to do basically a flash sale, because I was upside down in credit card debt, losing time at work and everything else, I lost about $50,000 just on the initial sale. That was 8 years ago. You know what that place is worth now? You know what I actually lost? I looked that place up on Zillow the other day. I actually lost about $300,000 on that. And you can say, yeah, so what? Well, I would have been living probably in that place now. And today I could have walked away with that amount of money. And then some. Now, that being said, I'm grateful for where God has put me. God has used these things that I've just been stupid on. Made a lot of dumb decisions, and He's used them for good. So I'm grateful that we are where we're at. But that being said, it was not the right decision. Just because God uses bad for good does not mean that what was done as bad was good. It wasn't. And that was following the Dave Ramsey principles. And why was that sold? It was because I was focused on debt as opposed to income. If I would have turned around, changed my mindset, changed the way I look at things, and focused on my income, I would have never sold that place. Because just like the scenario I told you before, it's like a millionaire to $65,000 in debt. It doesn't matter. So I challenge you to think about these things. If you've got any questions, I would say read Robert Kiyosaki's book, Cash Flow Quadrant. Start listening to Jim Rohn heavily. Phenomenal information in there. It's your mindset. Your mindset has to change. In order to get to the next level, when you're spinning your wheels, you got to change your education level. And in order to change your education level, you got to change your mindset. So, hopefully that helps. Hopefully you guys are enjoying some of these videos. Subscribe if you like to. If not, don't worry about it. If you guys want to keep listening, I'll keep putting out content. My name is Noah Gordon, and we'll see you next time.